in the media, if you're not reading the topic very carefully, and you're consuming the newspapers or TV, it's very difficult to get a clear picture. There's all kinds of mixed messages going around.
That is Dr. Maya Saurin talking about one of the big problems facing those who try and communicate the realities of science to the wider community. I'm James Purser, and on Purser Explores the World this episode, I'm going to be exploring communicating science. Science is awesome. I'm a huge fan of science, whether it's landing super hyper techno cars on Mars, discovering the particle that is responsible for me having so much mass, or even making your own ice cream. Science has been bringing the awesome since the first proto-human wondered what would happen if he banged two pieces of flint together. This week being National Science Week in Australia, I thought I'd have a chat with three communicators of science. Molecular biologist Upali Divisekara, President of the WA branch of the Australian Science Communicators, Magdalene Lum, but she's speaking in her own capacity in this interview, and Dr. Maya Saurin. All three of these women work in different areas of the scientific community, but they each share a passion for communicating what they do in a way that engages with the wider community. I thought we'd start by talking to Upali and Magdalene about what got them started, what challenges that they've faced, and a new project that they've started between them.
Okay, it starts, I guess, back to my undergraduate days. I noticed a volunteer program. It was a little bit quirky. It basically had about 1 to 2 hours spare at Murdoch University. You could go back into a science classroom at high school and talk science with kids. And I guess this stems from Julia Sumner Miller, actually, because when I was growing up in the middle of nowhere. The only signal we had was ABC TV, and he was on TV. Why is it so? I'm not sure if I was catching reruns or what the story was, because I shouldn't have caught this TV show because it's considered quite old and before my time. So I thought, well, I guess I can be like a Julia Sumner Miller, like him, and go in and talk about science. So it started from there. I am working in the lab now, but I am also still working with schools. I work with 2 schools. With Murdoch Star Peer Tutoring, I'm working with a high school. With CSIRO Scientists in Schools program, I'm working with a primary school. And so I'm doing both. It basically comes down to, I've never really thought about it. I guess it comes down to having grown up in regional towns where there weren't really any scientist role models and there were no science events. So that's what keeps, I guess, taking me back into classroom and saying, hey, I'm really a scientist, and yes, I'm not wearing a lab coat, and I'm just a normal person like you. And the kids do actually respond, because I'll talk to them about all sorts of things. And if it wasn't for volunteering in science communication, I wouldn't have discovered Harry Potter.
How does science communication go to Harry Potter?
Well, the kids were talking about Harry Potter.
Oh, okay.
And they were meant to be working on a project, and I just thought, okay, so what's going on? I'm not in the role of a teacher, but I was just going, but you've got a really cool project. And the kids had a really cool project. They were investigating the effect of smoke on ferns that were growing in the school. So they had their smoke, they had the setup, they had the ferns, but they're talking about Harry Potter. And it was driving me crazy. I'm going, okay, I give up. What is Harry Potter? Why is Harry Potter so awesome? And then they told me. And then they told me that I should read the book.
Many, many books later.
Well, yeah, I just thought it was one book. So I read the first book, and then I went, okay, I kind of get it. And then the girl was really sneaky because she hadn't told me that there were more books. There were 3 books, I think, at the stage. And she said, "Oh, you'll really get into it in the second book." And I'm going, "Okay, I will read these books if you do the project." So it's kind of on both parts.
Nice.
All right, so for Magdalene, science communications led to a lifelong love of Harry Potter. Upali, what got you involved in science comms?
Well, I kind of stumbled on the science communication by accident, actually. I've always been a science nut. Ever since I was little, I was crazy about science. But actually, like Mags, I had no one to talk about it with. My parents are not scientists; they're economists. They've got no idea. No one could answer my questions. And I was really, really lucky when I was about 11. My dad started working in a research institute, and one of his colleagues there was happy to answer my questions. And that was wonderful for me because it was the first time I had someone who was a real scientist able to answer my questions in a way that I can understand. So I went on to do science naturally, and I was working in a cancer research lab. And to be honest, I sort of ended up in science communication through Twitter. So I've always been interested in talking about science, but didn't have an audience for it. Mm-hmm. So on Twitter, which I joined actually to kind of whinge about politics, to be perfectly honest with you.
Who didn't? I know that's why I joined.
Yeah, so it was pretty much quite soon after the 2010 election. And I thought, well, I'll stop annoying people on Facebook talking about politics, and I'll just shout into the void on Twitter. I'll just do that. But as I started to talk about politics, I also started to just talk about stuff in general. And then one day I started to talk about the stuff that I do. When the arsenic life paper came out, the one about supposed arsenic life came out, I was so excited by it that I actually tweeted about it. And to my tremendous astonishment, people were really interested in it. They understood what I was saying, and they wanted to know more, and they wanted to know what happened. And when I started to talk about my work as well, which was in breast cancer research at the time, they were interested in that as well. And it was wonderful. It was a revelation because it's so good to. I love talking about science, and I love talking about nerdy, dorky things like that. So it was great to find an audience, and so I ended up sort of continuing on with it in an informal way on Twitter. But I also ended up talking about science in other forums as well.
You're on Radio National now, aren't you? On a regular basis?
Not on a regular basis. No, I've been on there twice. And in a way that kind of also got me onto starting my own podcast as well. Just because I can't stop talking about it, need somewhere to talk about it.
I know exactly how you feel.
I guess you do.
All right, so now science communications has grabbed you and introduced you to a whole range of strange things, Harry Potter, Radio National, and so on and so forth. But now you've come together and you've got a new project. What's that project?
So this project is called Letters to Sir David Attenborough, and it's something that we're working on together.
Okay, so what is it?
Okay, so do you want me to take this, Max?
It's sort of embarrassing at the same time for me because, what happened is that news came out that Sir David was coming to Australia for a tour.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I live in Western Australia, and I just figured, well, he's probably not going to come to Perth. He's not going to come to Western Australia. And I've known Australian tours just include Melbourne and Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
Long hold, it included Melbourne and Sydney. That was it at the time. And I missed out on tickets, and I was quite upset. Like, I was crying. That's how upset I was. And so I wrote a blog post and an open letter to David Attenborough,
mm-hmm.
how sorry I was that I wouldn't be able to see him in Australia, and also shared, I guess, how much he's influenced my life in the way that he's told his stories about wildlife and the natural world and that sort of thing. And I guess it got picked up because I just threw it out to Twitter, and that was it, because I didn't want to discuss it anymore. I didn't want to talk to anyone about looking for tickets on eBay, Gumtree, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't want to know, because it's one of those things on my bucket list I wanted to do. I just wanted to see this man live, and was quite prepared to fly over to Melbourne just to see Sir David. So I just went, no, that's it. That dream is over, because I know he's gotten quite old. And I just went, no, I'm done. I don't want to know. So I sent it out there. It got picked up. And then Upali started sending me messages, which I'll let her chime in from there.
Okay. So like Mags, I found out about the tour via Twitter, and I found out through other scientists, and it really touched a nerve because, like Mags, I'm crazy about Sir David.
I'm yet to find somebody who isn't.
I hear that there may be such beings in existence. I don't want to know them.
No.
But look, as far as back as I can remember, it's always been Sir David, and he's the one I want to talk about natural history with me. So I was really keen on his coming. As you know, it's like, oh God, will I get a ticket? Oh my God, it's so expensive. And I had no idea that Mags was struggling on the other side of the country. I was on Twitter, I just asked a bunch of people, since a lot of scientists were saying to me, oh, Sir David's coming, Sir David's coming. I said, oh, how many of you are interested in, how many of you found him to be an influence? And about out of, say, 10 people, 6 of them said, yeah, actually, he's been a really strong influence. Is one reason why I became a scientist. And I thought, oh, okay, that's great. That's really interesting.
Were the other 4 geologists?
I can't remember. Actually, I've had geologists actually say to me, no, he was a really strong influence. And then, so the day passed, and then I read Mags's blog post, and it really hit a nerve. It was like, this is what I actually want to hear. I want to hear how people are influenced by Sir David Attenborough. This is the kind of thing I want to see, because I can relate to this. I might be lucky enough to get a ticket, but Mags isn't. So I wrote to her and I said, look, I think that we should do something about this. I think we should ask people to write for us, and I think we should say thank you to the great man, because for many of us, he's really responsible for, or at least partly responsible for us becoming scientists, or he's influenced us in some way in the way that we look at the world, in the way that we appreciate the natural world. I mean, it's what, 50, 60 years of broadcasting? It's something quite exceptional. So I thought we should say thank you. And Mags's letter inspired that. And so pretty much within the same day, we kind of set up a blog and an email and everything. And yeah, Twitter account that works. And we put Mags's letter up as the first letter. And within the first week, I think we got like 5 letters, something like that, 5 to 7 letters.
Yeah.
And just sort of went on from there.
Well, I'm looking at the site now. You've got letters coming in from Australia, Canada, Kenya, United Kingdom, United States, Zimbabwe, and a whole range, and uncategorized, which is a very interesting country. But it's not just scientists who are sending letters in, is it?
No.
It's everyone. I mean, it started that way, but as word has gotten out, we're getting letters from all sorts of directions. So, it's been quite mind-blowing, and every time I read a letter, I'm at times almost very close to tears, because these letters are so genuine and so incredibly heartfelt, and they're not just sending them to us, they're effectively sharing them with everyone else. And I have to say, thank you very much. It's an absolute privilege to be doing this.
It is. It really is a privilege to be part of this project, because, as Meg says, they're really warm, they're heartfelt, and pretty much all of them are beautifully written. And they're coming from environmentalists, they're coming from political staffers, they're coming from physicists and teachers, all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life.
Well, I'm just having a look, and I've got a letter here from a Leonie Waldron in New South Wales. She's a marketer. She's a marketing manager. Yeah. She has no connection to science whatsoever. We've got Terry Anderson in Glasgow, who's a cartoonist.
Yeah, that was a good one. That came this week, I think, or over the past few days.
Yeah, August 7th.
Yeah, that's right. So it was quite unexpected, a cartoonist.
He really is the ultimate science communicator, isn't he?
Definitely.
Yeah.
He really has. I mean, I'm sure it's partly his manner and his stature, but but also his sheer unbridled enthusiasm. You can't get past that, and I think that's what really appeals to people.
He's got that boy in a candy store feel about him when he's doing his stuff, doesn't he?
Absolutely, and I think that's also sort of a key to science communication: just enthusiasm, sincerity.
And I think he's also got this whole manner about him that he doesn't assume that you don't know. He just goes, this is what it is. This is what we're seeing. And we'll watch it together. Even though his shows go out to millions, if not billions of people, it's widely watched. When you're watching it, there's no one else. It's just you and Sir David and whatever that you're watching together, whether it be blue whale or him playing with gorillas or a spider. It's just you, David, and that.
Or even fungus. The man can make fungus interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, who can do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he really does make it riveting, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's a really special gift. And I think that intimacy that Mags is talking about is really important as well, this feeling that, he's only talking to you and he's going to guide you through this. He's going to wander through a swamp with you and through a desert and, pick creatures out of holes kind of thing.
Sorry about that last bit there. We did get a little fanboyish, but let's be honest. It was about Sir David Attenborough, probably the ultimate in science communicators. Do go along to dearsirdavid.wordpress.com, read the letters from all over the world and see how many people from walks of life he has touched. Right, now that the fanboy business is out of the way, let's turn our attention to Maya Sarin. Dr. Maya, a PhD in electrical engineering and an advocate for good science communication. She believes that science comms shouldn't be something separate, but an integral part of the scientific work. Here's how she got started.
Well, I kind of discovered it by accident a few years ago. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I was doing a PhD, and I realized that there's this whole career stream called Know Cool Things About Science and Find Ways to Explain That to People. And I got involved with the Australian Science Communicators in Victoria and started doing some work with them and started looking at what people actually do, what that kind of job actually involves. And I realized that I don't want to do it as a career, separate from separate from any technical work. I think that science communication should be part of a technical job. And so whether I'm working as an engineer or a scientist or, whatever it is that I do, I think it's really important to make my work and all other stuff really accessible, completely transparent and explainable to anybody who comes in contact with it. I think that's a really important part of it. So I don't do it as a separate job, really. I just do it as part of my life, mostly.
So you live and breathe it?
I suppose.
Well, okay, for your PhD, you picked mobile phone radiation, which is a controversial, I'm using air quotes because you can't see me, a controversial topic. What made you pick mobile phone radiation?
Look, I was actually working on a different project, but it was a little bit black magic. And then this project came up, and for various reasons, it just seemed more attractive. It was really hardcore physics, which I was really interested in. My supervisor was actually looking for a student to take it on, which is what I did. And it just seemed like a more interesting long-term thing for me to do, to end up working in a field with basic principles, essentially, which is what I was dealing with. A lot of the work I did was really first principles work. You use high-end tools to model it, but what you're really dealing with is basic electromagnetic decomposition and absorption into human tissue. That's what I was looking at.
So you did your thesis. As part of your thesis, did you have a look at what other people were talking about with regards to this sort of stuff?
Absolutely, and yes, I did. Like most PhD students, I did a lot of reading and a lot of research, and it turns out that there's been a lot of work done in the area. There's the whole field of radio frequency safety grew out of ionizing radiation safety, nuclear safety. So the standards are are sort of shaped similarly, even though physically, in terms of physics, the behavior of the radiation is different. I also found out that actually there's very little, if any, evidence linking mobile phone use to cancer. There was a study, one of the big bodies of radiation, one of the big bodies whose job it is to assess research in this field in radio frequency safety and amass it and then make guidelines based on that, safety exposure guidelines. A few years ago, tallied up all the work that's been done and went, you know what, guys? We as a human race have spent more time and money and human hours and resources trying to find any link between mobile phones and cancers than any other potential carcinogen, and we've still come up with essentially nothing.
That's really interesting because, and yet we still hear media stories saying, oh, mobile phone hotspots, cancer hotspots near mobile phone towers and stuff like that. Where do you think the breakdown's happening in terms of communicating that, no guys, we've looked at this really, really, really well and there's no evidence, to media stories, my God, you use a mobile phone, your ear will fall off?
Yeah, look, there's a few things going on. One of them is it was a big sensationalist story and that's hard to kill. And the other thing is it's a bit hard to show lack of association. It's hard to show lack of one thing causing another thing, especially when there's been a whole heap of studies that do show some effect. The problem is that there were a lot of studies that said, oh my God, we found this effect. And then somebody repeated them and said, actually, we found nothing. Mm-hmm. Or there'd be studies that show some effect and they'd be reported that, but when you read it, the author themselves criticizes it and says, look, my sample isn't really big enough to say anything, or my methodology isn't quite right. So in terms of in the media, if you're not reading the topic very carefully and, you're consuming the newspapers or TV, it's very difficult to get a clear picture. There's all kinds of mixed messages going around, and the scientists will come out and say, oh, look, we found nothing. But they won't say we found nothing. They say, we found very little evidence, but our studies are heavily constrained, so we can't actually say anything too much, which is the way scientists say things. Mm-hmm. And that's the right thing to say. But scientists speak and general public speak are a bit different. So when a scientist says we can't be certain, what they often mean is we're 99% certain. We just can't say 100%. For example, that's the kind of thing that goes on. So it stays a story. In the public, it stays a story. In scientific circles, there's a lot of eye rolling.
Yeah, it's not just the mobile phone radiation thing either. There seems to be more and more of this thing of science is getting twisted around to meet somebody's political or belief system rather than actually presenting the facts, and the media isn't really helping in that.
That's true. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on where the media will give equal attention to both sides of the story, whereas in reality, there'll be, again, 95, 98% of scientists, for example, will have the same point of view, and a very small percentage will have the opposite view, but they'll get equal airtime, which makes the argument look like a real controversy when actually it isn't very much.
So how do we break that cycle, and how do we move beyond that that sort of sensationalist, we must have a controversy to sell rating cycle to communicate real science to the wider public?
That's a great question, and there's a few different ways to do it. And one of them is to make alternative media, to make other noise, which is happening now that we've got a lot of access to, blogging culture and podcasts. The word is getting out differently. It's not just being gatewayed by popular media. The other thing is to just get better standards for journalism, which may or may not be something that's possible, but it's something we can certainly aim for.
All right. So this week is National Science Week.
It is.
It is excellent, perfect timing for my podcast. So, what are you personally involved with any events, or is there something that you'd like to do a shout out about?
Oh, there's so many cool events on. The guy who designed and piloted James Cameron's the underwater submarine for Into the Mariana Trench. He's in Australia doing talks, which is so cool. There's so much stuff. I don't even know where to start. Yes, I am doing something. I'm doing a session tonight, in fact.
Yep.
I'm doing a food science workshop at Langley Learning in Melbourne, which is just a cafe in the city that get people to come in and do workshops about their pet topics. And there's everything from how to make soap to how to yo-yo to here, taste some olive oil. And I'm getting people to make ice cream from scratch, and I'm talking about science in the kitchen.
Sciencey ice cream. Anywho, a big thank you to Upali, Magdalene and Maya for taking the time out to chat. These three women are pretty representative of those individuals who are trying to cut through the dross, mixed messages and, let's face it, downright crap that gets put out there about science. They have a passion and they have the knowledge, and they intend to use these things to help bring the community around them up to speed with what is really happening in the world around them. This is no bad thing. And remember, this week is National Science Week in Australia, so go and find your nearest scientist and give them a hug. I'm James Purser, and this has been Purser Explores the World.